How's everybody doing today? I should say, how's anybody doing today? Is anybody doing well? Good. A little gloomy. Yes, it is a little gloomy. Great, thanks. Good. Yes, it is a 3-day weekend, isn't it? I will say that though you do not want me making a big deal of it, I do have a veteran in the house to celebrate, so. Are you ever not very busy? Well, Bev, thank you.
I think busy is the extension way.
I think that's true. All right, very well, Bev. Thank you. I have 2 o'clock Eastern Time, so I want to get us started. This is Heidi Muyeso-Kunzman again, and Mary, I think, will be joining us. She's actually traveling a lot now with work after being back from her trip, so she had she planned on moderating today, but we just weren't sure it was going to work out, so we thought it would be safest if I did it. So I think she'll be joining us. We'll hope so. I am very, very pleased to welcome Dr. Stacy McCullough today. I was saying, speaking and putting names to faces, that I have Stacy before at many of the NACDEP conferences and appreciated the great work that she's done through those. So some of you know the National Association of Community Development Extension Professionals. That's NACDEP. She does a great job there. So all of a sudden I put the name to the face with her agreeing to do this session for us, and I feel very fortunate. This is the first time she'll be joining us for this, and it should be great. So a little background on Stacy. She is an assistant professor of community and economic development with the University of Arkansas's Cooperative Extension Service. While there, she's affiliated with the Public Policy Center and also the Arkansas Procurement Assistance Center. Her statewide responsibilities include many that you will all identify with: entrepreneurship, public policy, agritourism, and rural development. I think it's important to note that with her rural development work, she's also very county-based. She supports 25 counties in that work. So, in fact, she's joined us from on the road today, so we'll add an extra special thank you for that. It's also important to note that she is now the Southern Region's representative on the National Association of Community Development Extension Professionals Association. So she's a big player in NACDEP, and we appreciate all that she does for us through that. So Stacy, if there's anything you want to add, please do. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to you.
I don't think to add about myself. I'm just glad to be here. And first, can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, sound great.
Okay. So today, I know this is kind of the 6th of the session that you all are doing. I participated in this training back when I started Extension early in my career, probably 7 or 8 years ago. And so I've kind of seen this from that perspective, but this is my first time being a presenter, so hopefully it will be acceptable, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of fun today as well. Today's session is on community assets, and there's basically 4 types of things that we're going to kind of go over today. The first is asset-based community development. We're going to look at 2 models, both the ABCD model, as they call it, and also the community capitals framework, and they're basically 2 different ways of characterizing those assets that exist within a community. But we're also going to talk about how you can, different ways that you can kind of use those to map those assets within a community, but then also how you can then utilize that. It's one just to know those assets exist, but there's a lot more that you can do with that to leverage those and make good things happen. And so we're going to touch on a little bit of that. I do have to credit Bo Ballou. Probably many of you know Bo. I think he's done this session several years in the past, and so I adapted what he had. Some of the slides in here are pretty much exactly what he had. Some of them are some things that I added through my work, and some of them are things that I tested at a training in Florida that we did a couple of weeks ago. So hope we'll gain something from this, and we'll go from there. So as we start, I just wanted to kind of hear from you all some of the key attributes that make your community special to you, the place that you live or the place that you work. You can kind of text those into the chat box. We'll kind of go through those real quick.
And everybody's had a chance to give this some thought because we posted it as a question in our Moodle site last week. So chime in.
Events, historic working well together, capital, the variety of services, the county seat, support that community members provide each other. And so we're basically going to talk about all of those things, plus a lot of other things, and kind of how they fit together and how you can kind of utilize those to better understand the community, help the groups that you're working with better understand, appreciate what they have, and then how they might be able to use that in moving forward. We'll start talking about community assets. I also like to just start by talking about community capacity. And there's lots of different definitions. If you were to Google this, I mean, I think the first time I Googled that, I found hundreds of different things. These two really hit home to me because they really focus on how important it is that it's done locally, that it's something that there's an initiative taken at the local level to address things that are going on that they want to see changed in their communities. I live in Arkansas, and a big part of the Arkansas area is the Delta, and that goes through a lot of other states in the South as well. I know you all have depressed areas in every part of the country where you might live. And a lot of times we just see all this money get dumped into these areas, but we don't really see any results that come from it. And I think part of it is it's always focused on the external stuff and not focusing on the local people and the local resources and how they can use those to address the problems that they see and that they think are important as opposed to outsiders coming in. And so I think that's really important as we engage community members and we work with different leaders within the communities to help them understand that you hold the destiny of your community in your own hands. And if you really want to see change, you're going to have to be an active participant in that process. So we're going to start with asset-based community development. And this is it's adapted from the work of John Kretzmann and John McKnight. In 1993, they had a book called Building Communities from the Inside Out. It's been used worldwide. It's used in rural areas as well as urban areas, rich areas, poor areas, areas that are growing, areas that are declining. When I was taking my coursework for my PhD over the last several years, that was one of the textbooks that they had us order. And it's not really a textbook, it's more of a community handbook. There's lots of good ideas for how you can identify those assets and then utilize those assets in your work. And if you have worked in community or you've been to community planning or strategic planning events, and the focus is really on what are the problems, what are the things that we want to fix. You can raise your hand or do your arrow, check mark. Nobody's sleeping. That's the approach that a lot of people take. It's what's wrong and what do we need to fix it. And, while you do have to be cognizant of the areas of need and the things that you want to change, start from that perspective is it almost sets you back in the process to begin with. Obviously you're overall trying to overcome those challenges or reverse negative trends, but there's a lot of reasons why that thinking about it from that perspective can be problematic.
Stacey, I'm going to have you pause for just a minute. Some people are telling me I am seeing your presentation loud and clear, and others, can you all raise your hand by checking that arrow if you are not seeing the presentation? You could be. I'm seeing it just fine on my screen. Are there people who are seeing it on the screen normally? Some people are seeing it fine. So what you need to do, let's try this. If you're not seeing it clear on your screen, go up to the little drop-down box that you have at the top of your screen that says you're viewing Stacey's application. You see a drop-down arrow at the far right of that, a little box. Click on that, click on View, and try Full Screen. If not full screen, try Fit in Viewer. There's a couple different options. Play with those for a minute and see what you see. Let me know how you're making out. Stacey, I'm sorry to pause you. I just want to make sure that we get everybody on board with us.
Absolutely. Looks like Rachel was having a problem.
Is that solution working for you? Okay, again, at the top of your screen, there's a little drop-down box. It should, you see an arrow to the far right of it. Go drop down, click on that, and click on View. And then click on In Viewer. It's still not working for me. Full screen, all teal, and I tried changing the view like you said, but no changes. Why would some of us be able to see it and some of us not? Okay. I don't know why it's doing this. It's not making sense to me that some are and some are not. So here's what I'm going to do. I am going to attach the PowerPoint. Well, let's try one thing, Stacey. Let's try getting out for a minute. And let's try getting out and going back in, reloading it, and let's see if that works. If that doesn't work, we'll see if I can load it on my screen, and I'll advance it when you tell me, Stacey, and we'll see if that works.
Okay.
Back to share and load back up again. Thanks for being with us, everyone. Okay. How about now? Are people able to see it?
Yes.
Okay, and are you seeing it as small or big? Big. Okay. So, see how that works for everybody. Changed it all? We're able to see it just fine. Okay, I think we're good then. Okay, great. Thank you, Stacey. Go ahead.
All right. So we're talking about kind of the problems with focusing just on the needs or deficiencies within a community. One of the things is that those negative images only represent a partial truth. And by focusing on them, you tend to overlook all the positive things that are happening within a community. And so that's one of the reasons why asset-based community development helps you kind of get a bigger picture. It's not that you're looking at those assets in a vacuum. You know that there are issues, but you have a balance of recognizing there are both strengths and weaknesses, and that you need to take advantage of your strengths in order to help overcome those weaknesses. Another problem is that it tends, looking at things from a needs perspective, tends to have programs or resources directed in a real piecemeal fashion. So you're not seeing comprehensive look at what are all the things that we can do to address a problem. You're just focusing money on one little thing, and you don't get a cohesive strategy to really create some positive change. Another problem is that sometimes that results in money coming directly to resource providers or service providers. So it might be in the forms of grants where these interveners can help to facilitate a process or get things going in a different direction, but there aren't any resources that really end up getting allocated to the residents and the entities that are actually living and working in those communities. And that can kind of cause some imbalances in terms of how well things are being implemented. It can also have a negative effect on local leadership because it can often make those local leaders feel like there's no hope. That there's nothing we can do. We keep trying to put things to we try to keep addressing these problems and focusing on these problems, and it doesn't empower them to actually go out and think about alternative ways of maybe using the positive things in their community to overcome those challenges. And the last thing, and we see this with other types of programs, whether it's targeted at disadvantaged individuals, a lot of people feel that focusing on needs discourages the idea of self-help, that you can actually make a difference and change the direction of your life or the direction of your community on your own with necessarily all these other people out there helping pull you along. And so these are some of the reasons why asset-based community development kind of emerged back in the 90s as an alternative way of looking at things. Ever seeing everything okay? Cool. So with asset-based community development, the focus is obviously on discovering what are the capacities and assets that exist within that community and use those or leveraging those to create policies and activities that can then create that positive change. So it's an internal focus as opposed to looking outside for help. It's looking at what can we do. And a big piece of that is looking at the relationships and utilizing those relationships and how all the different things within the community can fit together to help address those problems. So there are 4 arenas within this ABCD model for covering assets, and they involve people, voluntary associations, local formal institutions, and resources. So we'll talk about each one of those separately to begin with, and we're going to start with people. Successful communities and counties, they're the ones that always seem to find a way to get people involved. They're utilizing the skills and talents of a variety of people that really mobilize, and they're kind of those people that are always involved in everything, but no matter how busy they are, they still seem to find time to get things going. But that's just one aspect of those people assets. There are also hidden assets that exist within people that you may not be realizing or reaching out to, and so part of this is involving those people as well. So think about people in your community that have key positions and access to important resources. What types of people? Who do they tend to be? Can you have examples?
Cornell Cooperative Extension.
All right, Cooperative Extension Service. The electeds, the county managers, someone put in there. Certain department heads, absolutely. The local colleges. CE, what's that?
Also Cornell Cooperative Extension.
Industry, active citizens, there we go, local professionals. So people can come from a variety of different places, and a lot of times we go to the same types of people. In Arkansas, I know business owners, NGOs, some great ones to there. In Arkansas, all of our counties have a local advisory group, and I think sometimes we miss the boat on that. We have a little checklist, and they try to make sure they include someone from the schools and someone from the health industry or the healthcare industry and someone from each of these different places. And sometimes they overlook people that maybe just have some time and some ideas but aren't always at the table or aren't always getting asked to do things. And so it's really important as you're looking at the assets that relate to people that you look at everyone in the community and try to find, are there some hidden talents or skills that maybe haven't been utilizing that would be important to whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. At the end of the day, it's about tapping into the skills and talents of anybody who has some capacity to contribute. And so by reaching out to that diverse group, so not only the key people that you always think about, the ones that have access to other people or access to money or different resources, but also looking beyond those people to the others in the community that might have something to offer, and especially within the context of a specific thing that you're looking at. I mentioned a while ago that we don't just, when we do that mapping, we don't just start identifying all the assets that are out there. We're doing it in conjunction with something that we want to be changing. And so even though you're focusing on the assets, it's not without keeping those needs in mind. There are a couple of tools that are available, and you probably didn't put these on the site, but I did include the link in this PowerPoint. On the SRDC, the Southern Rural Development Center website, there are a couple of they're basically just worksheets that can help you sort of try to identify those people tools that are those people assets that exist within a community. So the capacity inventory of individuals is really focusing on the skills that specific people have developed or that they possess, where community participation and leadership inventory helps you try to find some of those emerging leaders that might not obviously come to mind when you're trying to figure out who should be involved.
And just note that actually, Stacy, I was just trying to go in and see if it was those particularly, but we did list a couple of the assessment tools. There are some on the site.
Okay, good. Okay. The next category that I want to talk a little bit about are voluntary associations. And so, as interprofessionals know, on an ex officio level or sometimes on a work-related level, we get pulled into different associations that exist within the community or around the state. A lot of us also have personal associations. So I wanted to ask you guys what types of voluntary associations you belong to.
They're typing that. We had a question from Peggy who asked if the skills as people are, as we do these assessments, if the skills are self-reported.
It can be either. The worksheets that you'll find on the list that I posted are ones that Real Group is looking at when they're trying to figure out who do we want to involve in this process. Those are things that they use. The individual one is ones where they kind of do their self-assessment of what they think they're good at. But you could kind of do that. We've done it with groups where both have done it. Like I might do an assessment of somebody and they might do a self-assessment, or vice versa. I might do one of myself and someone else does it, and we compare them. And that's a good way of learning about whether people maybe have skills that you think you know about but you don't really know about. So it is always important to make that connection with them on a personal level. Answers the question. You guys listed a whole slew of things. I don't think through all of them. A landowner association, too many mention. Yeah, that's the professional that we all fall into. Big brother, big sister, parent teachers. Don't have time to do anything. Yeah, if you're an extension employee, that tends to be a good thing. American Cross, Arts Advisory, Community Theater. So we all are connected, library boards, book groups, churches, foundations. We are connected to a lot of resources. And when we switch over to the community capitals model, we'll talk a little bit about the importance of utilizing and networking all of those groups together. Sorry, I've got to flip back. So a couple just points to think about with respect to voluntary associations, the first one is most of them rely primarily on volunteers, and so we do have to be a little bit cautious when we're trying to engage people, or at least be cognizant of the fact that just like us, they're pulled in many directions and they have lots of things going on at the same time as well, and so we have to kind of respect those and figure out what's a doable or manageable way for them to contribute in a way they can still do the other things that they're supposed to be doing, that they feel that they need to be doing. Voluntary associations do tend to be autonomous. They're not necessarily part of a governmental entity, although we do see a lot of governmental entities have these advisory groups who do tend to be voluntary. They usually have some type of a board that is, again, a volunteer thing. Myself, involved in NACDEP, that's something that I do just because I think it's important and I think the connections are important, but it's not something I'm paid for, so I have to kind of balance that against my workload and the things that I'm being paid to do on a regular basis. Associations do tend to be not-for-profit, although they're not always, and they provide some type of benefit or service typically to non-members. Formal institutions, these are more of the institutions, that's redundant. They're the things that exist because there's been some amount of money allocated, or there's some law passed, or there's some structure that has created them. And so the five big ones that we think of when we are in our communities are the educational institutions, just the schools, not just the public schools, but also the private schools, the colleges, the different Head Start, all those different pieces of the educational system. Economic institutions, so our banks and our financial institutions, governmental institutions, so we all know what all of those are, the health, and then also not to forget about religious institutions, which be clear. And one of the things I do want to mention, because this question has come up from time to time, some people have time figuring out, well, which group does it go into? I would not worry so much about which group, because a lot of these things are overlapping. That's why we use the Venn diagrams when we're talking about these types of frameworks or models, because in some instances there is spillover and you may fit more than one definition. But these are all institutions that really are needed to help our communities and our counties survive and thrive. When we don't have those institutions, or when they're weak, when they don't have good leadership and good people involved in them, the vitality of our communities are and we see that. I don't know what it is in other states, but in our state we have a lot of county turnover at particular times, and so we might have a county office where there's no family consumer science agent, or there's not an agent there for a significant period of time. And if we aren't, as an organization, stepping in to ensure that there is a local presence and that somehow we're trying to cover that period when there's a vacancy, we do see that it does have a detrimental effect not only on our programs, but also on the communities in which we work. You know, there are a lot of commonalities in my mind between the voluntary associations and the formal institutions. I think both of them are necessary within our communities, because one or the other, probably alone, are not capable of providing all of the things that meet the needs of our communities. And so they're both vital pieces of the puzzle. It's important that they're working well together, complementing each other when they can, supporting each other when they can. Because if those two entities, or those two groups of entities, are working well together, I think you're going to see a stronger community than when they're at odds, or when one thinks the other isn't important. There has to be some mutual respect and mutual collaboration, coordination, and really just thinking perspectives, the value that they both provide within a community. So there is another worksheet that's at the same website, and this is really an asset mapping curriculum that's on the SRDC website that I'm referring to. And so there is an inventory of local institutions worksheet in there, and that is not just the formal institutions. It's also something that you could use to identify the voluntary associations that exist within a community. And it really makes you think about, for institution, you would fill out a separate worksheet and identify what's the mission or purpose of that institution, who are the people that it engages with, the activities and programs that it provides, affiliated groups, their goals and interests, which are really important. A lot of times we think that because the Boys and Girls Club has always done this type of program, or the Senior Center only does this, or hospitals only care about health, we tend to not, we can sometimes miss the bigger picture because they may have an interest on a broader type of outreach or a more collaborative outreach with other entities, recognizing that they can't necessarily meet all the needs that they have by themselves. And so not only looking at what they do, but also what their future goals and interests are is important. Finally, the resources that they have access to, we really need to make sure that we think about that, because they have something that we need in our community development efforts and we may not have that direct access to. And so looking at that can also help fill in those gaps. So I'm seeing no chatting going on. Are we okay, Heidi?
Tells me we are. He had a question that asked how you do this, and I wasn't completely sure what this referred to, but he said we've moved on and he can pick it up later. Jeff, we can pause for just a second if you want to clarify. And I'm also, he says okay, so go ahead.
Sounds good. If you're trying to fill some blanks later on and something was confusing, don't hesitate to contact me. I think, Heidi, I'm hoping that you've got my email and other information somewhere where people notify me if they want to.
You can add that to your bio on the website, too.
Good. The last category within the ABCD model are physical resources, and it really is not, it's a combination of both those natural resources that are out there, but also the things that we as mankind have created. And so the built structures can be, they're not just the public facilities that are out there, but the housing that exists within the community, the educational center, the actual infrastructure from not only the community perspective, but the individual or sector perspective are also part of this category. The historical and cultural sites or assets that we have created or have accumulated over time is an important piece of this puzzle, as are recreational areas. And this is not by any means a comprehensive list. These are just some of the common examples that are out there. Looking at those built structures, it's important to not only think about the ones that are filled, but the ones that are vacant. A lot of times we think of these abandoned buildings down on Main Street or elsewhere as eyesores and nuisances, but if we think about them as assets and really try to figure out, is there some potential use or benefit that we can use these structures to fill, I think we have a better chance of having a positive thing happen, as opposed to just thinking, well, they're just eyesores that we just automatically need to tear down. So any questions about the asset-based community development model? Talk about how to apply this after we get through community capital.
I would just add to what Stacy's saying. When I first learned about this model, I don't know how familiar it is to everybody, but it's just, to me, a tremendous tool. And that's having been through lots of visioning processes that have come at things from the other end. And I just realized what a cycle we get into of thinking about what we don't have and who we're going to go to outside of our communities to address it. And I love this approach because it's really amazing for community members to sit in a meeting and do the asset asset assessment and realize, I've been where they've said, well, we really need this, and somebody else pops up and says, yeah, but we have this, and you start realizing that you actually do have a lot of the things that you might be looking for, or have closer ways to get them than to put a lot of money to have somebody else bring it in. That there's ways to create it, and it's opportunities. It's really inspiring, I think, certainly from having facilitated those, but also seeing the reaction of the people sitting at the meeting. So I'm really excited about this.
A great summary. I like that. So now that we've explored the 4 arenas of asset-based community development, I'm going to turn now to another model, which is the community capitals model, or the community capitals framework. And this is work, this is based on work by the Floras from Iowa State. It's completely different from the other model. It just kind of creates additional categories, but also maybe gives you a little bit different spin on how you think about some of those assets. And so, Community Capitals Framework is based on 7 different categories of assets that exist within a community, and these are all things that could be invested or utilized for positive purposes. And so, I'm going to start with natural capital, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these because to some extent some of them are self-explanatory. But natural capital, which if you think of an asset-based community development model, it falls into those physical resources. And these are some of the examples. It's the air, the soils, and the water, and all of those things. Also the biodiversity that exists. So it's not just looking at the individual things that exist within this category, but also how they kind of work together and build on each other and complement each other, and how you can kind of utilize those together. I will say about natural capitals, this tends to be one of the most underutilized capitals, particularly in an economic development perspective. I work a lot of rural communities that are really trying to figure out what can we do to stimulate our economy, and we talk about the need for the balance between your recruitment activities and your business retention expansion and your entrepreneurial development. And a lot of times they just have a hard time figuring out how natural capital can kind of fit into that picture. And so, but in rural areas, this is their most abundant capitals that are out there. And so it's something that they really need to take advantage of and figure out what can they utilize about this, or how can they make the unique aspects of their natural capital work in their efforts. The second capital in the Community Capitals Framework is cultural capital. These are the things that I think a lot of people think about when they think about what makes their community special, because especially in rural America, although I think I see this in urban areas as well, you think about, I want to live here because I like the small town feel, and I like that everybody knows each other, and I like that we have a festival every 3 weeks. Every community in Arkansas has some type of festival, it seems like, in the summer. Everything from bricks to food-related things to agriculture-related things. And so the things that make us really like where we're at. But do that on the urban side of things, because they tend to have a lot more diversity within the community, and so there are a lot of cultures that maybe are coming into with each other and starting to overlap and morph into other things. And so it really creates a rich environment for people that live in those areas as well. So cultural capital can be an asset whether you are rural or urban. And I think it is why most of us live where we live. Human, and this goes right straight to that those people assets that we looked at in the previous model. These are all the things that live within the people that reside. So I'm looking at something on chat here. So Genesee County, our Arts Advisor Group finished writing a cultural plan adopted by our legislature. We have to implement it. It's a tough sell when people are trying to make it economically. Any ideas? I would like to hold that till we get towards the end where we start applying some of these tools, because I think we might be able to stimulate some good discussion around that. But let me forget. One about human capital, I think it's important to note, and I find this, human capital tends to be the one I think of that it's most easy to change or leverage. You may not be able to change your natural capital immediately. There are lots of things that you can do, lots of programs that you can implement that are targeted towards stimulating and increasing that human capital that exists within a community. But we have to keep in mind that it's so closely tied to the other things that are out there. It's tied to what is our educational system. If we have a poor educational system, then that impacts our ability to increase our human capital. And so thinking about how these capitals relate to each other is going to be a critical part in figuring out how you can leverage them to increase capacity within your community. Next group is social capital. I talked about the importance of those groups. Social capital are the connections that exist within a community, and it can be between people and it can be between organizations. And there are two important aspects of this. There's the bridging aspects and the bonding. So the bridging has to do with connecting across groups of people or across organizations, whereas the bonding is the cohesiveness that exists within specific organizations. And it's important that you have both, but if you have an imbalance, a lot of times bonding, if you have an abundance of bonding social capital, it can sometimes create isolationalists or feel like they don't need to connect to anybody else. They've got everything they need. All their needs are being this one specific organization. And so you really have to look at, when you're trying to build capacity in this area, how you can stimulate both of those types of social capital to really make community more vibrant. So these are, I'm not going to read all the words on all these slides, but there are a lot of aspects that relate to the strength of your social capital. Everything interrelates with everything. Capital is, a lot of times when we think about political capital, we automatically think about our elected officials or our governmental entities. It's not just about that. It's also about the citizen engagement. We have a center in Arkansas that I'm also part of, in addition to community development, our public policy center, and it's really about citizen engagement, because better informed and better engaged people within a community make a huge difference in whether you have good policy within that community. And so really having an environment that encourages that engagement, that there's a trust between citizens and their governmental entities, which I know in this day and age sometimes it seems like that doesn't exist at all, and there's lots of reasons why it doesn't exist. But the more that we can create an environment where there is that trust, where elected and appointed officials are transparent and responsive to the citizens, and the citizens are also supportive and trustful of their governmental entity, can make a huge difference in whether you are up in terms of where you feel like the future is right for your community, or whether you feel that the future is not looking so good for your community. This one's straightforward, and this is the one where everybody thinks they need more when they're doing community development. It's financial resources that are available to help support projects and initiatives that you have going on in your communities. And so obviously our banks and financial institutions are critical to this. Community foundations, grants, the taxes within the community, access to credit, these are all important things. And a lot of times what you'll also see in community development initiatives, if you look at hometown competitiveness, for example, an initiative that's popular in the Midwest, building wealth is an important pillar within that initiative, because it is so important. It's one of the things that you can really utilize to help leverage and increase capacity in your other capitals. You want to talk about what you set up there?
Sure. I don't know how many people are familiar with the Wealth Creation Rural Communities Project. I just wanted to be sure that you saw that it was another way of looking at capitals. It's a little bit more from an economic development perspective, but I think there's lots of these models emerging, and they're research-based. They've been practiced. They're studied, and I think they provide a lot of food for thought. And again, new ways of thinking about your assets and building on those to strengthen communities. So I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Stacy.
And Jeff has written also up there that local government many times is dominant and can stifle community development. And that's absolutely true. And sometimes it takes a crisis to create a shift or a change in that local government structure. I know in our state we have a partnership in our funding with states and counties and the federal government. And when you have a finance committee at the local level of one person, that create a lot of havoc and can really, as you mentioned, Jeff, stifle the community development and really keep things stagnant. And so sometimes it takes a huge triggering event or somebody that's just not willing to take no for an answer to help change that dynamic. But that can be extremely difficult to change.
One other thing I'd add to financial capital, and you may have said it, as I'm looking up these other things I wanted to share, I might have missed it, but one of the things I talk about when I talk to communities about this is there's, I think, really innovative models when you think about crowdsourcing and those kind of things of coming up with financial capital that they may not even realize they had. There's a model, and I keep trying to find a link to it, but in Vermont, there was a restaurant that wanted to get started, and they went to their community and said, help us build the capital to do this. And the way they did that was they said, you give us so much money, and we're going to give you a set of gift certificates that you can come back to our restaurant and use. You can't use them all at once. You have to spread out over a year with your use of them, but they started that restaurant doing that. I think sometimes we think of that financial capital as having to be big and maybe some of the more traditional forms that we think of, and I think there are opportunities emerging that help us that a little bit.
Absolutely. I think we're really in one of the most creative time periods for looking at alternative ways of financing the things that we want to do, and so it's one of those things where, being open-minded, it's one of the reasons why I don't mind all these emails that I've subscribed to from all these different entities that I get every day, and 99% of it is stuff I don't care about, but occasionally there are these new ideas that come up, and you just think, wow, why didn't we think about that? That would be absolutely fabulous to use in our community. And so it's not a waste of time to get some of those things, because we are seeing a lot of creativity in this area, I think, due to the financial situation that we've emerged from, and also the changes in technology that are out there right now. The last of the 7 community capitals is the built capital, and this is the infrastructure that's out there. And a lot of times we think about the physical infrastructure, but we definitely don't want to forget about the broadband and the information technologies. I know that's the world that we live in. Carla put another link up on the website that you guys might want to look at for investing in your community. So is there a way to capture all these from the chat other than just going and watching?
Yeah, I can save the chat, which I typically do. I assume most people will send the recording, but I'm also happy to capture the chat and at least just send out these links to everybody so you have them in an email. That would be easy to do.
Cool. Looks like there's a lot of good stuff out there. Okay. So I turn now, and we're going to look at mapping tools or different ways of doing some of this asset mapping. Some of the links and tools that I mentioned earlier today focus on the individual capitals or assets. And while you can do it that way, you can kind of do it one by one. A lot of community development initiatives, a lot of facilitatory processes or strategic planning processes, we got to look at all of them at the same time. And I'm going to start with maybe some of you have seen, how many of you have been involved of or have knowledge of the Stronger Economies Together, the SET program? Heidi has.
So if our folks from Tioga and Chemung counties are on, but they actually adopted the program, weren't funded a national project, but adopted the program through a local USDA grant and did some work with it as well.
Yeah, so it seems like a lot of people may not be familiar, and it's a national initiative that has been rolled out through the Rural Development Centers in collaboration with USDA Rural Development and Extension, and it's basically a regional community development process. I think they're in phase 4, so they just have included new communities. Okay, Washington has it somewhere, North Carolina. I saw New York, I think, somewhere earlier. And so it's a community development, it's a community planning process like many others. They've done a really good job, I think, of incorporating both the asset mapping or the asset-based development model and the community capitals model together. And the reason that these models are so important is that it really helps you look at the whole picture of what are all the things that we have available to us that we can utilize to support our local efforts. And earlier, you don't want to just do this within a vacuum. We've done this with groups where they just start identifying everything under the kitchen sink, and not every asset that you have within a community may be relevant to what you're trying to achieve. And so you need to be thinking about these in conjunction